He's just an unemployed loser who tinkers with boats." The laugh that followed wasn't loud, but it was public. In that instant, a line snapped somewhere deep, not because of the insult, but because it came from the person about to join the family while my son stood frozen beside her. Respect vanished from the room like air through a cracked window. I felt the kind of quiet that doesn't pass. It settles, hardening into a promise. This isn't a story about revenge. It's about what you do when your dignity is priced at zero in front of a crowd. How you hold your ground without raising your voice. How mercy grows a backbone. And how a single careless sentence can reroute lives. Careers tested, loyalties exposed, and a legacy defended without spectacle. If you've ever been written off, minimized, or treated like background noise, you'll hear the undertow in what happened next, and why the lesson cost what it did. Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're watching from. And as you watch, don't just sit back, be part of the experience. If a moment grabs your attention, whether it's powerful, unexpected, or deeply moving, drop a comment with the timestamp of that scene and share your thoughts. Your reactions bring the story to life, and we love seeing which moments resonate with you the most. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, grab a coffee or tea, settle in, and let's begin. Morning slides in on a gray, usable light, the kind Seattle does better than anyone. Thin as paper, cool as a palm on a fevered brow. From my cedar deck on Bainbridge Island, I can see the ferry nose through a low skein of mist and hear the faint horn flatten across the channel. Coffee warms my hands, resin and salt hang in the air. Below the bluff, Harbor Works yawns awake. Doors rolled up, planers quiet for now, a skiff ribbed like a lung waiting to fill. I built this place out of a boat shed and a promise I made when breathing hurt. Keep the dock, keep the work, keep some space where a person's hands can learn to speak. Inside the shop, the bench tops shine with oil and scar. The chisels sit edge up like polite soldiers. Someone left a curl of cedar on the vise, pale and translucent as onion skin. I pocket it without thinking. At the rail outside, the plaque for Evan's mother catches a thin seam of light. I touch the bronze the way I always do, 2 fingers and a breath. Keep what is kind, it says, her words distilled. Some mornings I hear her voice plain as water. Some mornings I hear only gulls and the slow lap against the pilings. I left the fast track 5 years ago, stepped off before it bucked me off. People call that retiring. I call it turning the engine off and listening to the hull. I fund a handful of scholarships no one connects to me and spend most days teaching teenagers how to square a board that has no interest in being square. Grain remembers the tree. It resists. You learn to read the lines, not fight them. The lesson holds on land. The wedding invitation lies open on the workbench, thick paper with clean type, the Olympic rooftop pavilion stamped in blind deboss that feels expensive under my thumb. Evan's name and Lena's look good together there. I slide the invitation back into its envelope and tuck it beside a letter I'm drafting, the bones of a gift named for his mother, a quiet thing with more weight than ribbon. It will sit unopened until they've proven what they want to build is steady, not merely shiny. I don't need credit for it. I need it to do its job. My phone buzzes once and rolls against a mallet handle. "We're good on head count," Evan says, breathless, city sounds braided behind him. Lena might add 2 VIP tables, her team's bringing a couple investors. "Your party," I say. "I'll follow your lead. Just let us handle logistics, okay?" He laughs the easy laugh of a man running downhill. "Show up, make a toast, enjoy the view." I can do that. After the call, the shop feels larger. It has a way of enlarging when someone mistakes my silence for smallness. Evan means well, he confuses velocity with competence, but that's a tide every young man surfs until the board snaps or the ocean stills. I rinse my mug at the utility sink and watch the water coil away, thinking about arrivals and departures. What is carried on and what is shelved with gratitude. By mid-morning, a marine layer has pushed inland. The sound takes on that metal sheen, pewter polished by a sleeve. I check clamps on a little pram we've been skinning up, then run my palm along the keel until the heat of friction wakes a thin smell of tannin. 2 sophomores from the high school will be in later. They square their shoulders when they walk in here, then slouch again when they forget. I keep a chalk line handy for that. I keep patience handier. Out back, the old pickup waits with a bed littered by offcuts and a coil of line. The seat foam shows through where my jeans have ground it down. No one steals a truck like that. It already belongs where it is. I eat lunch on the dock, leftover salmon, an apple, a heel of bread, and listen to the gulls argue like uncles. Across the water, cranes stalk the shipyards, pausing as if struck by sudden thought. The day runs on rails, a sweep, a sharpen, a repair to a stubborn vice. I write a note about ordering more Danish oil and another about telling Evan a story he somehow missed. The one about his mother hand-sanding this rail when the chemo made the bones of her wrists look like reeds. Not to change his mind about the seating chart, not to win any late arguments, just to keep our ground true. In the afternoon, when the light slants friendly through the high windows, I sort a small set of photographs for a frame to place by the guest book. Nothing glossy. A picture of Evan at 12 holding a block plane wrong, his tongue out with concentration. A picture of his mother leaning against the truck, a square in her pocket from the day we fixed a gate in the rain. I set them aside and wipe the bench clean with long, even strokes. Toward dusk, the marine layer lifts like a slow curtain. The ferry goes the other way now, windows lit, carrying its quiet theater of faces, 1,000 separate stories between sips of commute coffee. My phone dings again, voicemail from a caterer confirming headcount, and a cheerful line about potential VIP expansion. It sits like a flag in my ear. Lena's world is good at multiplying important people. I prefer the math that counts hours and hands. I lock up when the light turns to nickel. The shop door rolls down with its familiar rattle, a sound I felt in my chest the first week we moved in and still do. On the deck, the air taste of cold salt and coffee gone to memory. I think of the canal in Fremont and the restaurant where we'll meet for the engagement dinner tomorrow, of Lena's fast talk and Evan's foot on the accelerator, and I tell myself what I tell the kids when they rush the cut. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. The ferry horn lifts once more and trails off. I pocket the cedar curl, flip the porch light on, and step inside, resolved to show up for my son exactly as I am, not as a prop, not as a caution, just the keel under a boat he has chosen to steer. The canal wore evening like brushed steel, a soft gleam under string lights, and a sky the color of slate just before rain. Bicycles ticked as they cooled along the railing. Inside the restaurant, the floor was poured concrete. The pilings were wrapped with rope for mood, and a chalkboard listed oysters in looping hand. You could smell brine and butter, a thread of diesel from a passing tug, and the faint cologne that always arrives early to networking. The hostess walked us past a table of young men speaking in acronyms and velocity. Lena's hand rode Evan's sleeve the way a skipper touches the throttle. Light, proprietary, sure. Our table sat by the window where the canal made itself known in a quiet slap against hulls. I took the chair that faced the water. Across the glass, a drawbridge arm stood like a metronome, waiting for its cue. Evan raised his glass first. He has his mother's smile when he's certain the evening will behave. He thanked me for coming, for being game, for showing up to the administrative storm called a wedding. I lifted my water. The waiter, all angles and competence, recited specials with the gentle pressure of a good salesperson. Lena took the photogenic fish that arrives like a magazine spread. Evan mirrored her order, adding a second appetizer to share. I asked for chowder and dark bread. The waiter nodded, professional, but his eyes flickered a fraction. It's funny how simplicity draws conclusions out of strangers. Lena began as the canal dimmed and the restaurant warmed. She had a gift for shaping air into bullet points. Teams, velocity, pruning. She described performance reviews like weather patterns that clear the air only by moving older clouds off the map. You can't scale with legacy drag, she said, lightly enough to seem harmless. Succession only works when lanes are cleared. She smiled at me as if including me in a club whose door I had chosen to leave. It's admirable you stepping back. People who are out of cycle sometimes see things others miss. I nodded and let the words find their own depth. There's no need to fight grain. You read it. The drawbridge alarm peeped in the distance, a robotic bird. Boats coasted through, white hulls glowing in the gray. The waiter brought bread sealed in heat, butter like pale stone. Evan leaned toward me with the eager good faith of a son who wants everything to look good. You should let us handle logistics, he said. Leverage your old network a tiny bit maybe. Seat a couple helpful folks where it counts. "Your evening," I said. "I'm here to applaud." Lena explained that her CEO, Dr. Adira Shah, was brutally data-driven in a way I might find intense. The phrase held both compliment and partition, a velvet rope in a sentence. She spoke about key partners, valuations, a pilot that could become a lighthouse account if the quarter behaved. The vocabulary hummed like a server rack. Dependable, chill, self-pleased. I touched the cedar curl in my pocket and thought of how boats hate being rushed through a tight channel. You nudge, you don't insist. Our chowder and fish arrived in a small parade. Lena photographed the plate with quick economy, then turned that same lens on Evan and me. She complimented the restaurant's lighting, the uniformity of plating, the way small touches elevate the brand. She watched me cut the bread with my pocket knife and said silk soft, "You have such unfussy taste." My dad got that way when he finally retired. The word hung like a sign on a door I don't recall posting. Evan laughed automatically, then checked my face. I kept eating. Salt, cream, dill, a thing made for the work of warming. Between courses, Lena pivoted to the wedding itself, seating matrices like choreographies, a potential expansion of what she called the VIP footprint. She described VCs as a kind of weather, invite the right ones, and your climate improves. This could be such a smart convergence, she said. Brand story, personal story, all aligned. Evan added that a sharper suit on me would photograph better. Just for the album, he said. Crisp lines. "I'll show up clean," I said. "You steer." Outside, a dark kayak slid by, low as thought. The drawbridge lowered, and the restaurant's hum shifted a half-step louder. A table behind us cheered an engagement of their own. Someone clinked a knife on a glass until the sound got chased down. The waiter returned with dessert talk. I passed and asked for the check. I prefer to leave things unwet by sugar. Lena kept the current talking. She summarized a recent internal review as if describing landscaping. Overgrowth, sightlines, clearing. She said families, too, carry long-tail assets that end up dragging maintenance into the future if no one cleans them up. Docks and sheds linger forever, she said, almost cheerfully. Someone has to tidy the map. Evan touched my elbow. "I can help you tidy a little paperwork soon," he said, light as a joke. "Small stuff." "Small stuff," I repeated, as if noting a tide chart. I asked them where they saw their first place, what window, what light. Lena answered in basis points in neighborhoods that signal arrival. Evan added a yard for a dog he doesn't have yet. I pictured the boat shop's gravel, damp and honest, and felt a small hinge inside my chest take weight. The check arrived like a conclusion. I set down cash for my portion and added tip enough to release the waiter from whatever he had guessed about my soup. Lena half protested in the graceful way people perform generosity before they're used to it. I thanked her and stood. The canal breathed a cold line through the door when it opened and closed. Outside, bicycles loosened from the railing like birds. The drawbridge lights blinked. Evan hugged me. He smelled like a day run hot. "We'll make you proud," he said. I told him he already had, which was true on most mornings. The air carried lemon from someone's plate and diesel from a boat making the turn too tight. The ground under my feet tilted, not enough for a hand to the rail, just enough to remind a body that balance isn't a given. I walked the canal a block before turning toward the car. Behind me, the restaurant multiplied birthdays and deals and toasts. Ahead of me, the dark water took everything said tonight and stored it under its own tide. I drove home with the window cracked, the cedar curl in my pocket catching salt, and a line I didn't say out loud. Some storms begin as a single degree of lean. In the morning there would be email in the first innocent form I never asked anyone to file. The plane caught on a stubborn vein of grain as the phone rang, the blade chattering up my forearm. I set the tool down and answered with sawdust in my mouth. Our family attorney sounded careful the way a man sounds when he's testing a slick plank with his weight. He asked whether I truly meant to authorize a limited power of attorney so Evan could streamline title work on the boatshed parcel. Paper shifted at his elbow. The ferry laid a low ribbon across the channel behind me. I told him to send everything. On the workbench laptop, the packet opened like a kit I had not ordered, a release of lien. I had no reason to sign, a notice of intent to market, a vendor engagement for event space feasibility. My name traveled across the pages in a stylus loop that remembered old habits, the H a touch too proud, the T crossing farther than I cross it now. The timestamp said 10:43 p.m. 2 nights ago. I zoomed until the pixels stood up like bark. A notary line carried the wrong middle initial. Another page listed an address I had never updated with the county. A clause I would never approve, authorization to solicit offers. Sat there like a seal with too many teeth. I requested the full audit trail from the e-signature platform. While I waited, I printed the pages and stacked them with a carpenter's squareness. Shavings gathered at my boots like pale drifts. The shop smelled of hot metal and resin. When the email chimed, I followed the breadcrumb line, originating IP, root, device fingerprint, timestamps. The IP block resolved to a commercial network assigned to Cascade Quantum Systems, and the internal extension mapped to the floor where Lena's group sits. A second access hop resolved to Evan's apartment network, the SSID I had helped him name the day he moved in. I made no speech to the empty room. I wrote what I had found in a neat column on a yellow pad. I texted Evan, 5 minutes at the shop. He arrived quickly, hoodie half-zipped, coffee steaming, trying to turn his speed into mine. I laid the printouts on the bench and kept my tone level. Light optimization, he said, tapping the lid, just to reduce your admin load. Who prepared these, I asked, and why do they route through CQS? He said Lena's team, templated forms sometimes, that this was only queuing options, nothing binding, a modern workflow. He looked toward the dock as if the water might offer him an answer. He added that he thought I'd be relieved. I told him signatures are rudders, small turns move hulls a long way from shore. He said he hadn't read every clause. I believed that part. Negligence has a different temperature than malice. We walked out to the rail. The plaque with his mother's words took the day's thin shine. He touched the bronze with the back of a knuckle and pulled away as if it were warm. The channel wore its nickel color. Kelp popped against the pilings. Somewhere a skiff coughed, then settled. I put the attorney on speaker. Freeze it, I said. Written revocation of any pending authorizations. Hold filings on the parcel. Flag my name for notice. He said he would issue letters and secure affidavits. I emailed the platform to retain server logs and confirm the devices that drew my counterfeit loop. The printer complained as it swallowed paper. I labeled a manila folder HarborWorks title and fed it everything that wasn't nailed down. Evan tried again, softer. He said he and Lena wanted to help me optimize and unlock trapped value so I could stop worrying about maintenance. I kept my hands on the rail and watched the graying wake of a passing boat widen and thin. You don't move a memorial to save someone else an errand, I said. He nodded, then shook his head, a young man's contradiction. He said it was just starting a queue. I thought about how queues become trains. After he left, the shop took its slow breath. A neighbor, carpenter, patient with steel, stingy with words, stepped through the bay and said he'd seen surveyors earlier in the week running a tape along my bulkhead. He didn't like the way one of them kicked a flag into the gravel. When he had gone, I walked the line myself, photographing orange whiskers of plastic and white paint marks like small injuries on stone. A glossy card was wedged in the doorframe, eager as a salesman's smile. Event development, the kind of firm that turns docks into venues and memories into margins. I filed it with the prints. Back at the bench, I wrote down what had happened in block letters, not because I would forget, but because the mind behaves once it can see its own trail on paper. Dates, times, wrong initial, right questions, IP ranges, device footprints, the SSID I recognized. Then I drafted an invitation. Come for dinner, salmon and green, 7 o'clock. We'll talk like people who trust each other. Before I hit send, a text from Evan arrived. Lena has slides. She can walk you through ROI. I sent my invitation anyway. Patience is not passivity. It is a keel. Dusk trimmed the light to a narrow strip across the plaque. I turned the shop lights off one by one until only the door glow remained. The last thing the bronze held was the word keep. The ferry horn dragged a low line across the channel. I locked the bay and stood on the gravel with my hands in my pockets, the cedar curl warm against my thumb, measuring the distance a hull can drift when someone decides a signature is small. Chapter 4. First attempt. Quiet failure. I set the table as if the arrangement itself could steady the night. Reclaimed fur wiped to a soft sheen, 3 plates on linen placemats the color of unbleached sail, water in squat tumblers that catch the kitchen light like small harbors. Salmon hisses in cast iron, the kind of sound that says, "Patience pays." A wedge of lemon waits on the board next to dill fronds, cooling their perfume. Through the open window, the briny air leans in, and beyond the deck, the shop throws a honey square onto the planks. Harbor works, breathing like a sleeping animal. I put a sprig of rosemary in a jar and set it near the framed photo on the sideboard. Her smile can still change the temperature of a room. I do not look at the folder on the counter. Evan knocks in his old rhythm, 2 in a pause. He comes in keyed up, backpack slung, coffee breath under the mint. Behind him, Lena moves with a precision that suggests she prefers edges to curves. She uses the word lovely the way a surveyor uses chalk. Lovely lines in here, and I can feel her measuring the room for what it might become. I hand them plates. The salmon flares a little when butter meets heat and settles with a sigh. I choose water over wine. Clarity is its own mercy. We eat for a while as people do when they don't yet trust the conversation not to tip. Outside, a ferry stitches white lights across gray water. When the silence grows too architectural, I set my fork down and describe the day I found this table in a salvage yard, how the fur wore 100 years of nails and still offered a straight bite to the plane. I say the table is a better listener than most people. Evan smiles and lets the smile fall. He unzips his backpack an inch. Lena lifts an iPad from a slim case and lays it face down like a promise. I address the filings first, not the feeling. I tell them I froze everything and asked counsel to place holds, to retain logs, to issue letters no one likes to receive. I keep my voice low and level, the way you set a boat onto the trailer without scraping the keel. The iPad wakes to a title slide. HarborWorks Conversion, letting the room know we have competing definitions of kindness. Lena taps through bullets about seasonal revenue and vendor partners as if reading tides, except her tides arrive on schedule and leave no drift. She says a phrase about maintenance drag and cash flow that sounds efficient the way a clean wound looks efficient under hospital light. She mentions brand lift and smiles toward the deck as if the shop were already a stage. I offer a story instead of a counter-argument. In the months after chemo, I came out here with her, and we sanded the rail until our arms trembled, then ate soup on the steps and set a little plaque that says, "Keep what is kind." The first Saturday, we opened the doors. 2 kids who only knew how to swear turned a board end for end until the grain agreed to be read. The day they cut a line straight enough to trust, they stood taller, and the air changed. That is the only conversion I need. Lena shrugs with courtesy and offers what she calls a staged approach. A temporary license, a partial conversion, a pilot to test appetite. She uses tidy the map and move fast, prune faster the way other people use napkins. Evan echoes terminology not his own and asks whether an easement would count as respect, whether a part-time venue might still honor the story. The iPad throws pale light into faces I love and do not recognize tonight. I ask 3 questions plainly. Why did my name route through CQS? Why did a notice of intent to market appear in a family packet? Why does help begin by erasing what I keep? The room bends a fraction as if the house itself inhales. Evan picks the least dangerous truth. He didn't read every clause. He says they wanted to reduce my load, to unlock value, to relieve me of maintenance. His eyes find the photo and pass it as if contact burns. He is a good man in a hurry. I remember being one. I tell him signatures steer hulls. A small turn here sets you into a different channel 10 miles down. He nods and does not hear it yet. Lena rephrases the plaque as movable symbolism and describes a heritage wall inside a repurposed venue, a curated corner where memory can be honored without wasting shoreline. She calls it monetizing footprint while honoring story. The language is competent. It makes me tired. She asks for a pilot signature, nothing binding, a harmless authorization to explore bids. She looks at me over the iPad with the patience of someone accustomed to getting yes. I say no as gently as I know how. No to pilots, licenses, bids, conversions. No to easements that promise to be temporary and never are. HarborWorks remains intact. The dock remains a classroom. All discussions about my property will go through me in writing. The words are small stones laid into a path that will hold weight later. Evan's shoulders drop an inch. Lena's smile retunes itself to professional neutral. I clear plates to give my hands something honorable to do. The pan smells of lemon warming its last note. I cut pie and set it down. No one lifts a fork. A fairy horn threads the pause and pulls a quiet behind it the way a net carves silence out of fish. I suggest we walk the deck and they decline without saying so. The conversation has begun to speak a dialect that feels like policy. At the door, Evan hugs me with a stiffness he learned in rooms where outcomes are pitches. He says they only wanted to help and that they'll circle back with proposals. Lena thanks me for dinner and for surfacing constraints she can translate into an updated deck. Their shoes sound too clean on the planks. I ask them to leave the dock in my name alone. They nod in a way that means they hear the sentence, but not the meaning. After they go, the house returns to being a house, a series of switches extinguished one at a time. I wash the plates by hand because machines do not know where to rest a palm on a memory. The rosemary loses a little of itself into the air. I step onto the deck and touch the rail. The shop throws its square of light like a vow. Hospitality did not move the keel tonight. It seldom does. Keels move when water insists. Inside, my phone lights the counter with a small blue insistence. A calendar invite has arrived from a CQS address. Vendor review, exploratory, my name in the attendee list, as if consent were a clerical matter. The date is soon, the tone cheerful. I close the phone, turn the last switch, and let the dark take the house back to its honest shape. Somewhere out on the channel, a wake meets a bulkhead and makes the sound that boards make when they remember who they're nailed to. So do smelled like heat stored in brick. The warehouse had been sandblasted into a venue. Steel trusses, Edison bulbs trembling in their filaments, concrete polished to a low sheen that remembered boot prints. Through the loading bay door propped with a chrome wedge, a freight horn pressed a long note under the talk. Caterers valve released lemon and thyme from silver pans. Glass chimed thinly as people tried on, laughter scaled to networking. I arrived early and pinned the small enamel flame, the Emerald Science Initiative, onto my lapel. The habit is older than the pin. It's a way of telling myself which rooms I'm entering and for whom. Evan moved like a man taking his turn at the center, proud, busy, hopeful. Lena didn't move so much as place herself, adjusting the room by inches the way a stage manager trims sight lines. CQS people gathered in clusters that looked like org charts made of bodies, a nod of VC's weather vane toward power. I stood by the bay door where the air could still pass through unedited. A groomsman toasted velocity and friendship in equal measure. A colleague of Lena's referenced a monster quarter and the word alignment as though gravity were a corporate asset. Evan squeezed my shoulder on a pass. I gave him the steadiness I could afford, which is the sort you only learn after you've already needed it. Lena's entourage coalesced around a woman in slate. Doctor, Adira Shah, smaller than her reputation, quick in the eyes. A board observer hung a respectful half-step behind her. A venture partner hovered with his smile set to ready. Lena glanced my way as she angled the group across the floor, a look calculating whether a courteous introduction carried any return. She brought them to a stop in the light that photographs well and turned the circle open just enough to include me, the way a host points out the band without planning to tip them. "This is my future father-in-law," she said, voice bright enough to carry but shaped for intimacy. Sweet man, but an unemployed loser who tinkers with boats. A reflex laugh cracked at the edges of the circle, polite, brief, as if someone had dropped a fork. Flatware stilled. Air thinned. The word loser didn't sting. It landed like paperwork, like something that had already been filed without me. Adira's gaze left Lena and fell to my lapel. Pupils ticked, focus changing planes the way it does in the lab when the instrument finally snaps to. She stepped in and the circle rearranged itself around her decision. "Martin Hale," she said, first name and last together, like a lab result you trust. She hugged me once, efficiently, then faced the group. When my grant vaporized in 2010, no pilots, no templates, his quiet check kept our lab open, she said. He mentored 3 of us at odd hours and refused to be named. Without that bridge, the patents you celebrate tonight don't exist. A hush moved, not dramatic, just decisive. I watched a VC smile back up and choose a different gear. Someone set a glass down too firmly. The stem rang a single thin note that outlived the hand. At the bay door, the knight leaned in as if to hear better. Lena's expression held, a practiced smile trying to update faster than it could. Evan's face cycled. Pride, confusion, a prickle he didn't yet have a name for. He looked at me, then at Adira, then to a middle distance where outcomes are negotiated. Adira bent an inch toward me and 2 inches away from the circle, audible to anyone who cared to listen. "We're investigating a vendor inflation loop," she said. "Templated approvals." Metadata brushes Lena's group. "Your read?" "Let the room keep watching," I said. "Sometimes lessons prefer witnesses." She turned back to the cluster. "Some people build holes you don't see," she said, not looking at me this time. "The work holds shape under other people's weight." She introduced me to the board observer as a structural mentor. The phrase took a chair at the table and no one asked it to leave. Evan edged close enough to speak without tearing the fabric of the moment. "Dad, why didn't you say—" "Saying is not the work," I said. Lena reached for a lighter tone and found its absence. She called her line a miscommunication, playful hyperbole, and gestured to my pen as charming branding. The circle did not accept the lifeline, because it wasn't drowning. It had simply decided which direction was sure. Beyond the bricks, a forklift beeped sadly. Adira lifted her glass and made the smallest sound with the spoon, not enough to demand attention, just enough to receive it. She thanked families and mentors, said the word integrity plainly, and invited people to find dessert where the light was kinder. The room exhaled, but glances kept returning like curious birds. I went back to my place at the bay door. Outside, cranes kept their patient poses against a violet seam of sky, as if the city had been balanced on their thin backs all day and was relieved to be held. The enamel flame on my lapel did its small, steady job. Phones start their own conversations when the air cools. Mine pulsed. A text from Evan, "Please meet me early at the venue tomorrow," then a calendar placeholder from a CQS address, integrity review, preliminary, like a cloud that has learned to send formal invites. I pocketed the device and let my hands be empty in a way that reminded me of work. Fingers open, ready to take hold without closing on a throat. I held the insult where it belonged, which is to say, I didn't carry it home. What I carried instead was the felt knowledge of how fast respect migrates when someone points it toward the right coordinates. Rooms are weather systems. Tonight, the pressure shifted and nothing in the forecast could pretend it hadn't. The freight horn spoke again, low and longer this time, and the lighting filaments trembled once more in their tiny glass prisons, the way a body trembles after impact when it discovers it still stands. Ballard woke, washed and bright. A roof of pale cloud pulled taut over the water. On the Olympic rooftop, early staff moved like a rehearsal of birds. Chairs lifted and nested, linen gone crisp under a quick iron, a florist pinning ranunculus so white they looked borrowed from frost. Coffee threaded the air. Rain that had visited in the night left its ghost on the railings, beating into orderly constellations. Standing there, I could hear gulls work the light and the distant bell of a cyclist on Ballard Avenue, the city's morning tuned low. Evan arrived with a suit bag over his shoulder and the look of a man who slept inside a decision. He set the bag on a chair and for a second just held the chair back as if it could hold him in return. He tried to apologize without nouns, then found a few. He asked what I intended to do about last night, about Lena, about the way a sentence can reorganize a room. His voice carried two currents, love and optics. They rarely agree on a route. We walked the aisle end to end before it learned feet. Florist's tape still marked the ribbon line down the center. The runner lay rolled like a chart. I trailed a hand along the chairbacks the way I read grain, palm light, pressure even. The city below felt like an audience taking seats. Forklifts murmuring by the canal, a bus sighing to a stop, the brewery's sweet mash rising like a benediction from 2 blocks over. On a cocktail table, place cards waited in ranks, little flags for an imagined territory. I made the ledger quick and quiet in my head. Harbor Works, The Plaque Promise, The Boys Who Straighten Their Shoulders When a Board Comes Clean, Evan, Good Heart, Bad Hurry. Lena, competent to the edge of care, then careless with the rest. Adira, who had learned to run a lab with one hand and a company with the other. The question wasn't punishment, it was use. What turns a young person from shortcuts to craft is not the size of the hammer. It's the lesson that still holds when no one is watching. Evan said he hadn't understood the reach of my work with Adira, that he had taken my quiet for an exit. He admitted he had oiled doors with my name once or twice, and that one email sounded like me, but did not originate from me. He asked me to keep the company's matter away from vows, not because he doubted the truth, but because he feared the size of the echo in a room built to amplify joy. We reached the terrace edge, where Ballard slips toward water. Wind lifted the corner of a veil that lay sprawled on a vendor crate like a tired cloud. I asked him to look 10 years past today's photographs. Who signs for you then? Who refuses? He stared at the place where the runner would begin. A goal took a slow circle that matched the tilt of his shoulders. I told him my choice. I would not make theater of a correction. If disrespect repeated in the open, I would answer in the open. Otherwise, mercy would get the first bite and process would do the work that muscle rarely does well. Conditions were plain: full revocation of any unauthorized acts, a written apology to counsel. From now on, family matters routed through me in writing and nowhere else. No pilots, no templates, no queuing options. He closed his eyes a heartbeat and opened them steadier. Relief and shame braided in his face the way morning braids light and cloud. Talk to her, I said. Oh, rope tells you who a person is. We found Adira in a side room where a rental mirror leaned against raw brick. She had a notebook open, 3 bullets written in a hand trained by long chalkboards. Compliance had set a preliminary review for after the wedding, no names public yet. I asked for restraint during the ceremony. She agreed without thinning the investigation. She thanked me for not using her as a hammer and returned to her notebook, where one of the bullets simply read, "Patience protects." Lena appeared with a clipboard and the unruffled brightness of a woman who has already mapped 3 contingencies. She was radiant, and professional radiance is its own armor. She said her remark had been banner gone wrong, offered fast words about stress and staging, said she'd intended no harm and invited me to see the intent instead of the impact. I declined the exchange. I drew the boundary where it should have been obvious. Respect is not a prop. Harbor Works is not a canvas for brand stories. My name isn't an all-access wristband. I told her I would accept a private apology now and a public one later if the moment offered honesty rather than theater. For the company, full cooperation with integrity review. For the family, no more templating my consent. For the property, a written acknowledgement that authority is singular and it is mine. She weighed her options the way a trader weighs a spread, then chose the words available. "I'm sorry," she said, and it landed as both calculation and contrition. Rope had touched her hand. What she'd do with it would right itself soon enough. Around us, the venue tuned its instruments. A quartet sight read a standard and slid quietly into tune. A baker's assistant wrestled a cake tier with both arms, her mouth set in a determined line. Rain lifted off the rails and returned to the sky in increments small enough to escape notice. I pinned a boutonniere onto Evan's lapel and felt the tremor of his breath under the cloth. My cufflinks were plain today. I would save the enamel pin for when it could mean stewardship rather than scorekeeping. I told him we would proceed with the wedding and with the truth, neither amplified nor softened for effect. No theater, no shortcuts. He squeezed my shoulder and for the first time in days grew still. It's a rare thing to feel a person arrive inside his own posture. At the terrace edge, my phone vibrated. An email from compliance setting integrity review 48 hours after the wedding, CC including Lena's work address. The subject line wore no drama and therefore had more power. Below us, the first guests showed up as bright coins on the sidewalk, turning into people as they approached the elevator. The quartet found the key it wanted. Wind flipped a place card once, twice, then let it be. A gull wheeled and broke the seam of cloud. I pocketed the phone, took my place where a father should stand, and prepared to walk my son down his day without adding a storm to a vow. Applause arrived on time, gentler than rehearsal, as if the room feared to bruise anything else. The vows had held, faces shone with effort as much as joy. From the terrace, the city hummed its ordinary hymn, but inside, the Olympic rooftop people clustered by new maps, some closer than planned, some suddenly far. Light loosened from amber toward nickel. A violin tested a note and let it hover without landing. I kept to the edges long enough to measure the weather. A VC who had promised a warm intro drifted into neutrality with the grace of someone stepping off a moving walkway. We'll revisit post-quarter hung like a coat he didn't want to carry. A board observer spoke to Evan in small, safe sentences about the band, the view, the canapes that vanished too fast. Two colleagues from the company adjusted their smiles and avoided the photographer's lens. A third deleted a half-written post I could see mirrored in the window. Optics had become ballast. Evan crossed to me with that tilt that means the ground inside a body has changed grade. Pride and dread jostled his shoulders. He was beautiful and young enough to think those must always conflict. He asked whether I was angry enough to end the night. I told him we would honor the vows and keep the room safe. He nodded and pocketed his phone when the first polite but chilly pings began to populate his inbox. A man can learn a new posture in a minute. Keeping it takes longer. Lena managed the receiving line like someone threading a rope through a narrow block. The practiced smile frayed at the corners. She tried to reframe a conversation and met a wall made of courtesy. Her eyes tracked the company's leader across the room, no contact, no plea, just the dawning comprehension that power had moved and would not be coaxed back by charm. Somewhere near the bar, a small circle read a compliance notification aloud, preliminary interviews to be scheduled, and then each person pretended it hadn't arrived. Phones buzz like insects at harvest. Inconvenient. Inevitable. I did not explain the notification's timing to anyone. I refilled water, moved a chair that had gone where it shouldn't, and let the room remember how to be a room. Mercy works best when it doesn't audition. On the terrace, where the air still held the morning's cool, Evan and I found a pocket of quiet. I restated what already lay in writing. No signatures, no pilots, no routing my name through templates or favors. He said, "I'll own my piece," and did not lace it with reasons. It was the first clean plank of the afternoon. Micro wounds accumulated and evaporated. A distant relative squeezed my elbow and offered, "Good for you, staying active," in the tone people reserve for pets that have learned a trick late. I let it pass into the sea of noises no one keeps. A junior colleague of the bride tried to trade gossip for reassurance. I closed the door with a look I've used on power tools used wrong. A caterer asked if I needed water and placed it in my hand with the same care she gave every glass. Kindness doing what performance never can. The cake moment came on schedule, a ritual built for cameras and relief. The crowd watched for a flinch and found none. When it was my turn to toast, I kept gratitude small and unadorned. No moral, no reckoning, nothing for anyone to Instagram into a parable. I named endurance and left the air unbroken. You could feel permission move through the room, stand down, eat dessert. Consequences, however, do not respect dessert. Calendar access pinged. Contract routing suspended pending review. A vendor rep slid a business card across a table with "Call after Monday" penciled in the corner. Evan opened a draft post, read it as if it belonged to someone else, and closed the app. I watched him place the phone face down and leave it there. Sometimes discipline is a hand that doesn't reach. My own cost made its ledger. Fatigue stiffened the left shoulder. The ache behind the eyes returned like a tide. A small tremor visited the fingers when a glass was too full. Mercy is heavier than anger. It does not poison. That is the trade. I stepped to the railing. The sound breathed in the distance, a slow lung under glass. In my pocket, the cedar curl warmed the heat of my palm. The dock would hold. That was the sentence that kept writing itself under everything. We had kept the night human. No one was made an example in public. The room would remember that the next time it had to choose between spectacle and care. Back inside, small repairs appeared like fish surfacing at dusk. Evan thanked a server by name and returned a place card to a guest whose heels had chewed it to a crescent. He stood longer with people before moving on. Lena asked a staffer if something needed moving and then moved it herself, the clipboard absent from her hand like a mistake corrected. None of it offset the formal notices. All of it mattered. Music settled into songs that ask nothing, only offer a place to be. Clusters mixed again by degrees. The light thinned to nickel and then to whatever comes after. The couple stepped away to a quieter corner, no grand send-off, just fingers interlaced like a decision. I left the room as I had entered, upright, quiet, boundaries intact, and in the hallway my phone vibrated with calendar placeholders that would populate the coming week. I silenced the notifications and chose my next task: turn consequences into guardrails. The night had already taught me the first lesson: keep the keel under the boat when everyone else is watching the flags. The light over Ballard turned amber, the kind that forgives and records in the same breath. The quartet shifted to quieter songs. The room remembered how to talk without performing. Energy bled off the walls in a slow, decent way. Somewhere in my left shoulder, a knot presented its bill. I rolled it once and let the ache tell me the day had been expensive, but survivable. The cake cart squeaked through a service door and exhaled sugar. Evan found me by a planter box full of rosemary and hardy thyme. We stood in the herb smell and watched the city fade toward cobalt. He didn't start with apology, he started with breath, which is sometimes better. Then he said he would unwind what he had done in my voice. "I'll revoke everything," he said. "No excuse." His eyes stayed where our shoes bothered the nap of the carpet. I kept the air plain between us and asked him to write 3 notes before midnight, one to counsel, revoking any authorizations and apologizing in complete sentences, one to me, acknowledging the boundary he had tried to make porous, one to Adira, offering cooperation as a witness if compliance asked. He nodded and added the smallest word a man can add when he is learning: yes. I told him to come to Harbor Works for 2 Saturdays, not to lead, not to advise, only to sand, sweep, square, and do it at the pace the grain allows. He agreed. "And stop speaking in rented language," I said. "Use your own." We shook hands as if we were strangers agreeing to terms, and then he let his head drop forward so our foreheads almost touched. "Thank you," he said, 2 words that often arrive when the invoice is larger than pride. I caught Lena by the service hallway where the venue breathed. Bus tubs, carts, the skeleton of the night doing its work. She had smoothed her face into blankness, a look people wear when they are letting a new map replace an old one. I set the conditions I had already named. Full cooperation with integrity review. No more templating my consent in any form. A written acknowledgement that Harbor Works and the dock are mine to govern, period. Then I added a bridge that could hold weight. 6 months of ethics probation, structured by compliance and co-signed by Adira, plus community hours at Harbor Works, logistics for teens, not branding, not content, just the moving of things in honest sequence. Excellence was permitted, trespass was not. Her first instinct tried to negotiate scope, the way a hand twitches at heat before the mind has time to decide. She stopped, reset, and chose the sentence available to her. "I accept." The words were clean enough to stand. Then, without the usual padding, she said, "I'm sorry," and named the harm, the phrase, the paperwork, the presumption. I believed the apology about as far as it reached, which was a start. Rope lay in her hands. What she did with it would write itself where everyone could read it. Adira stood near the AV booth talking to a technician about a small hiss no one else could hear. We stepped to one side. She confirmed the review calendar, 48 hours, confidentiality intact, remediation on the table if cooperation stayed whole. "Not theater," I said. "If Harbor Works figures into it, let it be restorative, not PR." She nodded, made a quick note, and asked permission to anonymize the family elements in a training program they were calling Ethics Reboot. I told her yes, the point was the habit, not our names. When she left, the hiss was gone, as if an unseen dial had been tuned to ground. Back in the room, the edges had softened. Conversations found their regular gravity. Evan circulated differently now, less wave, more listening, the sentences shorter and truer. I watched him choose eye contact over presence management. Lena thanked 2 caterers by name. It looked like a new habit trying itself on and not hating the fit. A small victory is still a victory. It grows if fed and fails if starved. I reached into my inside pocket and touched the sealed envelope addressed to both of them. Inside, a letter and a check that bore his mother's name and intention. The condition had never been performance. It had always been kindness and steadiness, two things that look small and hold like oak. Not tonight, I thought. Let the first steps land before we hand anyone a set of keys. Evan's aunt, who has watched me long enough to read my jawline, drifted close and stood as if we had always been mid-conversation. "You didn't humiliate anyone," she said. "That matters." I told her mercy builds fences better than force. She patted my sleeve like a conclusion and went to rescue a centerpiece from a curious toddler. The band eased into a standard that knows how to get out of the way. I checked the guardrails in my head the way a captain checks hatches. Written revocation and apology from Evan, written acknowledgement from Lena, compliance review with teeth but not spectacle, harbor work service for both of them with splinters guaranteed. No more shortcuts for anyone. Actions, not feelings, processes, not announcements. The room kept healing in little boring ways, the only kind that last. I let my body be tired for a minute. The knot in the shoulder loosened under the weight of habit. I thought of the dock at Blue Hour and the way hands look when dust gives them a second skin. I pictured the plaque, no bigger than a postcard and somehow heavy as the first day we screwed it in. Keep what is kind. It had always sounded like a law disguised as advice. By the time the last light left the bricks, I had put the envelope back in my jacket with a decision I could carry. Tomorrow, not tonight. Evan stepped onto the floor with the Lena for one slow song. He held himself differently. Less forward tilt, more balance. She let her forehead touch his cheekbone and closed her eyes as if hearing a new instrument. A breeze came through the propped door and fluttered a stack of napkins, then gave up. I stood where I could see the door, the band, the rails, and my son in one frame. The count would start in the morning. The dock would remain where it had always been, useful, sturdy, unafraid of weather, and so, if we did our work, would the people who had almost learned to treat it like a set. Morning after, the house held its breath. The boutonniere lay beside my jacket like a shed leaf. A faint map of salt marked the collar where I had hugged too many people. In the desk drawer, the sealed envelope waited as if it had a pulse. My phone lit once, Evan. Letter sent. A screenshot followed, his email to counsel revoking any authorizations, apologizing in complete sentences. I replied with the time to meet at Harbor Works. The rest of the house resumed being a house. By noon, the shop's familiar light had come back to itself. Brooms leaned where they always had. The planer's bed reflected a thin version of the door. Evan showed in work boots he hadn't worn since college, palms open to the day's orders. I handed him a broom and a bin of fasteners to sort by size. He asked what was actually needed, not what might impress. The rhythm of bristles on concrete made a sound like rain trained to good behavior. Sweeping is older than plans. We worked without narration until the floor showed its grain again. 48 hours after the wedding, Adira called from a conference room that sounded like glass and airflow. She didn't read minutes. She summarized the shape. Templated approvals had been traced to Lena's group. No theft, no money moved, but boundaries had been eased until they passed for process. Controls were tightened, vendor inflation loop dismantled, contract routing taken from Lena's hands. She would serve 6 months of ethics probation, pass through mandatory compliance training, and complete community hours at Harbor Works as restorative action. A written warning would keep her company for a while. Adira thanked me for the rope instead of the hammer. I told her the point was the line that stays straight after the pressure leaves. Evan's 3 letters printed crisp. He handed me copies without speechifying. The one to me acknowledged the boundary he had leaned against like a door that would not push back. He asked to keep showing up rather than explaining. I showed him how to oil a plane so lightly you can hear when the blade registers the wood instead of the can. He tried, adjusted, tried again. Later, a student asked him how to square stock, and he spoke slowly instead of performing competence. A man's hands learn what his sentences forget. Lena arrived for her first Harbor Works shift in practical clothes, clipboard left in the car as a deliberate act, a ponytail, work gloves. I assigned logistics, stage lengths by project, map the shelves, find the missing clamps, and log what the shop truly needs. No branding, no cameras, no content. She thanked the neighbor carpenter by name when he handed her a square. It looked unpracticed and real. Twice she reached for the kind of optimization that speaks out loud and stopped herself. The notes went in her pocket, not the room. We sanded a rail at blue hour. Sun laid a gold bar across the dust we raised. Resin warmed the air. I wiped the bronze plaque with a whisper of oil, and the letters deepened until they felt engraved in the light itself. Keep what is kind. Nearby, Evan crouched at a cleat and felt a wobble only a regular would notice. He tightened a bolt without announcing it, then tapped the line like a man listening to a tense guy wire. In wind. No sermon. The rail gleamed like a healed scar. After the first Saturday, we sat at my kitchen table with tea instead of champagne. Evening found its easy edge against the window glass. I set the sealed envelope down and let my hand rest on it until the room measured the weight. Inside was the fund in his mother's name for a first home, to be activated after 2 months of steadiness, attendance at Harbor Works, clean integrity review check-ins. I read the letter aloud. The money was not a reward for optics, it was a vote for the people they were building. The condition was small and hard, kindness and steadiness, nothing else. Evan listened without interrupting. Lena kept her hands flat on the table as if pressure could stop them from trying to explain. They nodded once, together. Lena asked to make a brief internal note at CQS acknowledging her remark at the rehearsal dinner and reaffirming standards of respect. I approved it provided it stayed measured and lived beside her probation terms. No spectacle, apologies are workers, not balloons. At a small family brunch, she apologized again, naming the harm without euphemism. Evan added a single sentence about maverick emails he would never send again. No one clapped. We returned to eggs and fruit. Adira sent a draft of the ethics reboot slides for consent. Family was scrubbed from the story. Process remained. One slide carried 2 lines I recognized. Signatures are rudders. Keep what is kind. I agreed to their use. The point was to build habit in rooms that handle power. Markers of quiet progress accreted. Shelves in the shop wore labels in Lena's neat hand, and for once an inventory spreadsheet helped rather than demanded obedience. Evan's calluses darkened into their old topography. A sophomore asked him if a board was square enough, and he smiled and taught the trick with a diagonal and pencil instead of grabbing the tool. The pickup's bed held sorted scrap instead of confusion. The shop smelled of oil and cedar, not hurry. We ate stew with bread at week's end, nothing plated for effect, everything hot in a way that forgives. Laughter sounded like it belonged to people who had steered through tight water without capsizing. Evan asked me to tell the table story again, how the fur kept faith with the blade, and this time he listened all the way to the end. Lena asked to borrow a book on shop safety. I handed her one with penciled notes from his mother, a margin of reminders written by someone who believed in fingers. Guardrails closed their loops in writing. Compliance's memo confirmed Lena's probation terms and the Harbor Works schedule. Evan blocked out 2 Saturdays a month and forwarded the recurring invite without commentary. I punched holes in paper and added a new tab, Guardrails, to the Harbor Works title folder. There are folders you keep because the world bends toward friction. Order is not a superstition. Night put the dock back in its best clothes. Tide turned. The rail held shine and a hint of warmth. The cleat sat tight and ready. The floor was swept. The plaque caught one last line of day like a promise-taking ink. I rolled the bay door down to its familiar rattle, metal, track, gravity, end, and felt the keel do the simplest good work a keel can do. Keep a line true when nobody's watching. Low tide showed the pilings like ribs. Morning laid a thin line of light along the rail, and the plaque caught it, the bronze deepening as if breathing. I moved an oiled rag over a handspan of cedar until the grain answered with that quiet, satisfied dark. Steam lifted from my coffee and threaded the air that still remembered night. Gulls floated on it as if they trusted the day to hold. 2 months is not long unless you use it. Saturdays came stacked like fresh boards. Evan kept his dates with the shop. He learned again how to square by eye and confirm by diagonal, to feel a proud edge without looking, to sweep so that the broom leaves a story you can read. He talked less and better. A teenager with sawdust freckles asked how to tell which way the grain wanted the plane, and Evan put the boy's hand on the board. "Here," he said, small. "Listen." Lena ran logistics the way lungs work when you're not thinking about them. Shelves took labels that made sense to hands. A color-coded map appeared quietly, taped inside a cabinet door. It matched the world as it is, not as presentation decks like to pretend. She showed up for compliance check-ins without drama and left with the same face she brought. Adira's ethics reboot launched in rooms I'll never enter. Someone sent me a photo of a slide on a screen, anonymized story. No names, just a sentence I recognized. Signatures are rudders. Another slide quoted the plaque line without attribution. It looked at home on a wall made for equations. On a cloudy Tuesday, I signed the release that activated the home fund in his mother's name. Paper took ink the way dry wood takes oil. Hungry, then grateful. Across the table, Evan's phone chimed the bank's confirmation. He didn't grin. He looked at the photo on the sideboard and made the kind of nod a man makes when he agrees with something older than he is. We didn't fill the silence. Some things lay their own bridge. They found a small craftsman not far from Ballard, shingled and humble, porch deep enough for Rain to talk to. The front room had afternoon light and a corner that asked for books. We set a frame on fresh paint. Lena measured once, then again. Evan marked lightly with a pencil he had finally sharpened right, and the bubble settled where it should. The frame sat true on the first try. No one photographed it. That was the point. Lena finished her internal apology, brief and archived where it belonged. Her probation clock ticked without incident. There were no victory laps. There was the memo that closed a loop and the habit that would keep doing it. At Harbor Works, she arrived on time, tied her hair back, kept the clipboard in the car. She handed a clamp to a kid who had no idea what a clamp could prevent and said, "Try now." She left without telling anyone what she had improved. Evan and I walked the canal path one evening, the water taking a long breath before turning. I handed him a slim notebook, the kind that disappears into a pocket. Inside the cover, I had penciled 3 lines: respect first, roll second. Signatures are rudders. Steer on purpose. Keep what is kind, especially when no one asks you to. He read, nodded once, and pocketed the book as if it had weight. Small proofs accumulated where I would have missed them if I'd looked only for drama. Lena asked to borrow the safety manual again, this time to teach her niece how to treat sharp things with something better than fear. She returned it with a sticky note on a passage his mother had underlined about hands being the part of you can't replace. Evan replaced a worn broom head without being told and left the receipt clipped to the peg, the new bristles standing like a field after rain. A new class took the bay one Saturday. A thin kid with a stubborn jaw cut his first truly straight line. The room heard it before it saw it, the way a blade sings when it stops correcting and starts traveling true. I stepped back and let Evan praise the work. Lena reset clamps for the next pair without narrating the gesture. The shop breathed the way a hull breathes when it's tied right, a little give, then rest. In the quiet after the storm, the lesson is simple and difficult at the same time. The worth of a life is not measured by applause, titles, or how loudly someone can sell a moment. It is measured by the habits that survive the noise. Keeping a promise when no one is checking, refusing shortcuts that look efficient but bend the line, choosing words that carry weight without bruising. When the door closes and the room returns to itself, what remains is the work we did with our own hands and the boundaries we held without spectacle. Mercy matters, but only when it has edges. Real mercy does not excuse harm or wash away accountability. It gives people a path that requires effort. It says, repair what you can and let your actions be the apology. It understands that a second chance without guardrails is not kindness. It is negligence dressed up as grace. The practices that last, revoking a bad signature, showing up to sweep, learning to say less and do more, are unglamorous, but they are how trust grows back the way skin does after a cut. Slowly, faithfully, cell by cell. Steadiness matters more than speed. The culture will keep offering velocity as proof of value, as if the fastest answer must be the truest one. But good timber is seasoned slowly. A straight cut is patient before it is clean. Even a keel does its best work out of sight, holding the course when eyes drift to the flags. Most of the repair that counts will never trend or go viral. It will live in the way a team corrects itself after a hard meeting, the way a family sets new rules and actually follows them, the way a person returns to a room they left carelessly and puts every tool back where it belongs. Power is revealed in small decisions. Signing a name carelessly can send a life 10 miles off course. So can declining to sign until the terms are right. Saying no softly and meaning it is a form of stewardship. So is saying yes to labor that will not be credited to you because you would rather be useful than seen. The tools change, but the physics do not. Pressure applied in the right direction at the right time changes the shape of things. Pressure applied for show changes nothing, except maybe the size of the mess. Respect is a first principle. It comes before roles, resumes, or revenue. When respect is present, correction becomes possible. People can hear what they need to hear because dignity is intact. When respect is absent, punishment becomes theater, and everyone leaves more stubborn than they arrived. The point is not to win the scene. The point is to build a culture where scenes are unnecessary because standards hold. Wealth is not the villain, and poverty is not virtue. What matters is the way power is handled, whether money is a tool for repair or a mirror for ego. A check written privately at the right moment can keep a future alive. So can a boundary spoken clearly at a table that would prefer a smoother conversation. The best gifts move without spotlights and arrive with conditions that protect the receiver from their own hurry. Kindness can be firm. Generosity can be disciplined. Love can say, "Not yet," and still be love. Silence is not surrender. Sometimes the most responsible answer is to let process do its work and to keep tempers from colonizing the moment. The internet will ask for spectacle. Conveniences will ask for your signature. Fear will ask you to harden into someone smaller than you are. Decline the invitations that flatten you. Speak plainly, document carefully, and make space for people to demonstrate who they are becoming. People change not because you lecture them, but because you give them something sturdy to walk across. There is nothing mystical about a legacy. It is just the stack of daily choices made in the same direction. Show up, tell the truth, keep what is kind. Replace broken parts before they fail the next person. Teach what your hands know and let others take the credit when they deserve it. Protect the work from becoming a stage, and protect the stage from pretending to be the work. If you are lucky, your name will be the least important thing written across the best things you helped build. So let this be the take-home plan, simple enough to tape to a fridge and stern enough to live by. Respect first, roll second. Put guardrails on every second chance. Sign slowly. Praise in public. Correct in private. Use money to heal, not to posture. Apologize with verbs. Keep your promises small and frequent because the big ones are just the small ones added up. And when a room tempts you toward theater, remember that a straight course isn't loud, it is simply kept. Thank you for staying with this story. Your time here is not background noise. It is the measure of a community that values reflection over spectacle. If something in this journey moved you, if a line clarified a decision you've been avoiding, if a moment reminded you of the person you want to become, leave a comment and tell us what stayed with you. Share the timestamp if a scene hit hard. Your note may be the light someone else needs to navigate their own turn. If you'd like more stories that trade revenge for repair and drama for depth, subscribe and turn on notifications. That single click keeps these conversations afloat and tells the platform this kind of work matters. Share this video with someone who is facing a hard boundary or with someone who needs permission to be kind without being soft. And keep coming back. We will keep building a library of quiet victories, hard-won lessons, and practical hope, the sort you can hold in your hands. In the days after any reckoning, there is a temptation to overcorrect, to swing the wheel so hard that you trade one kind of drift for another. Resist it. Choose calibration over drama. Build checklists that are boring and therefore reliable. Schedule the conversations you don't want to have and keep them short, kind, and clear. Write down what you will no longer sign and post it where you can see it. Teach the young by letting them practice instead of preaching at them. Thank the people who carry water when nobody is filming. Honor the places that taught you patience, the shop, the kitchen, the dock, the bench, and protect them from becoming sets. Most of all, remember that redemption is not a plot twist. It is a discipline. It arrives on time because someone showed up on time, again and again. Until the next one, keep what is kind, keep your line true, and let your signature steer where you mean to go.